Cold December winds blew through the streets of Boston. Eleanor Morrison gazed out the window of her old wooden house, quietly sipping her coffee. Christmas decorations were beginning to appear on the street trees, and Christmas songs could be heard from the neighboring homes. "Mom, is this okay?" Eleanor's son Thomas appeared wearing a red sweater. His eyes were the same clear blue as his mother's, with a sharpness that seemed to be constantly observing. He was a child with a composure and intelligence that belied his 10 years. "It looks wonderful on you, Thomas," Eleanor smiled gently. "Are you ready to go to Grandma's house?" Thomas nodded slightly. "Yes. But I'm not good at talking to everyone." Eleanor pulled her son close. "That's all right. You don't have to force yourself to talk. Just be sure to greet everyone politely." Looking at her son, she remembered when she was his age. Eleanor herself was never good at conversations. That hadn't changed. The only place she felt comfortable was in her small bookstore surrounded by old books. Morrison Books was an antiquarian bookstore she had inherited from her father, continuing to operate quietly in a corner of town. Thomas was Eleanor's only family. 5 years after the divorce, her ex-husband Michael had remarried and moved to another state, rarely making contact. Child support was paid without fail, but that was the extent of his responsibilities as a father. "Shall we go?" Eleanor took a deep breath and stood up. "If we're late, Grandma will be angry." Her mother Martha was the owner of a real estate company who lived in an upscale suburb of Boston. The family gatherings, held several times a year, always took place at Martha's mansion. Each time, Eleanor couldn't help but feel uncomfortable. After driving their old used car for 40 minutes, they arrived at Martha's house. The stone path leading to the entrance was perfectly cleared of snow, and a Christmas wreath proudly adorned the front door. The door was opened by her sister Vanessa. "Well, Eleanor. You finally arrived." A hint of irritation flickered across her beautiful face. "Everyone's waiting." Vanessa looked as if she had stepped out of a fashion magazine, perfect in every way. Her blonde hair was styled at a salon, and a Chanel dress beautifully wrapped her slender body. "I'm sorry, there was a bit of traffic," Eleanor said quietly. "Always the same, aren't you?" Vanessa gave a small laugh and looked down at Thomas.
Can you imagine making $10,000 a month just from YouTube, all from home? That's exactly what I did with Reddit Stories. No face, no voice. Check the link in the description if you're curious.
"Hello, Thomas. Will you give your aunt a kiss?" Thomas silently kissed her cheek, but his body was stiff with tension. Eleanor gently squeezed her son's hand. The living room was bustling with relatives. Martha's siblings and their families, cousins, and distant relatives whose faces and names Eleanor couldn't remember. And sitting like a queen on the central sofa was Martha. Next to her was Brad Hamilton, Vanessa's fiancé. The tall, strong-jawed real estate investor always wore a confident smile. "Eleanor, you finally came," Martha's voice always carried a subtle tone of reproach. "That sweater, you wore it last year too, didn't you?" Eleanor smiled anxiously, conscious of her clothing. "Yes, I like it." "Well, never mind. Come, greet everyone." Martha raised her glass. "Brad, would you like another drink?" The conversations in the room centered mainly on Vanessa and Brad's engagement and their future plans. Vanessa proudly showed off her engagement ring, and relatives offered words of congratulation. "Hey, Eleanor," asked one of the cousins. "What about you? Have you found someone new?" Eleanor smiled and shook her head. "No, I'm busy with Thomas and the bookstore these days." "Oh, I see," another cousin said with a sympathetic expression. "Well, that's understandable. Being a single mother and running a small store, it must be difficult." Eleanor said nothing. She was used to this kind of conversation. In the eyes of her relatives, she was always poor Eleanor. The daughter who didn't follow her mother's business and chose a boring, old bookstore instead. The oddball who lived modestly despite coming from a wealthy family. Thomas sat quietly in a corner of the room, reading a book. Occasionally, he would look up to observe the adults' conversation, appearing to be deep in thought. As dinner ended and dessert was being served, Martha suddenly stood up. "Everyone, may I have your attention?" She lightly tapped her glass with a spoon. "I have an important announcement today." The room fell silent. Martha smiled with satisfaction. "I'm getting older. And it's time to think about our family fortune," she spoke slowly, choosing her words carefully. "Today, before Christmas, I've decided to distribute part of my inheritance." A small murmur arose among the relatives. Eleanor held her breath. Martha continued. "I've prepared special Christmas presents for my dear daughters." The room was filled with expectation and tension. Eleanor looked at Thomas. He had raised his face from his book and was watching his grandmother with a serious expression. Martha slowly stood up and straightened her back. Her eyes were as sharp as ever despite her age, and all eyes in the room focused on her at once. "First, Vanessa," Martha said with a smile. "You are the pride of this family. You've built an excellent career and found a wonderful fiancé. Your future is bright." Vanessa smiled with satisfaction and clung to Brad's arm. Eleanor sat quietly, hands folded on her lap. "Vanessa, this is my gift to you." Martha took a small box from her pocket and opened it. Inside was a shiny silver key. "Is this?" Vanessa gasped. "Yes, a new condominium in Back Bay. A perfect home with the finest location and amenities. With this, you and Brad can take the first step in your perfect married life." Cheers and applause erupted around the room. Vanessa let out a small scream and rushed to hug Martha. "Thank you, Mom. I can't believe it." Brad also stood up and bowed deeply to his future mother-in-law. "Thank you very much. I promise to make Vanessa happy." The relatives excitedly discussed the gift. A Back Bay condominium. That must cost at least a few $1,000,000. As expected of Martha, so generous. Vanessa is really fortunate. Eleanor watched her sister's joy with a quiet smile. In the back of her mind, she thought of her own modest rented house. The key Vanessa had received was a ticket to a property Eleanor could never afford in her lifetime. After the congratulations had quieted down somewhat, Martha spoke up again. "Next is Eleanor." The room became quiet once more. Eleanor straightened her back and looked at her mother. She wasn't expecting anything, but her heart was still racing. Martha pointed to a corner of the room. "Do you see that antique chair over there?" Everyone turned to look at an old wooden chair against the wall. It was worn, with one leg clearly unstable. The seat was threadbare, and small cracks ran through the backrest. "That's Eleanor's gift," Martha said matter-of-factly. For a moment, the room was completely silent. Everyone seemed to be trying to understand the situation. Then, one of the cousins snickered, and the laughter spread throughout the room. Eleanor was stunned. A broken old chair. That was Martha's special Christmas present to her. She nodded expressionlessly and said quietly, "Thank you, Mother. Be grateful you have something to sit on." Martha said with a broad smile. There was a cold light in her eyes. "Considering your lifestyle, this should be enough, don't you think?" Vanessa interjected. "Mom is right, sis. We've each made our own choices. I worked hard and succeeded. You." She paused, looked around, and then continued. "You're content with your little used bookstore. No effort, no ambition. An expensive condominium wouldn't suit you." Eleanor was at a loss for words. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she desperately held them back. Thomas came to her side and placed his small hand on hers. "It's a nice chair, Grandma," Thomas said quietly. "Mom and I can fix it properly, I think." Martha looked down at Thomas, frowning slightly. Yes, your mother does like to do everything herself. It doesn't cost anything, after all. The relatives laughed hesitantly, and the conversation returned to the topic of Vanessa's condominium. Eleanor stood by the chair placed in the corner and quietly examined it. The chair was probably old. The wood was high quality, and the carvings were beautiful. With proper repair, it could become a truly lovely piece of furniture. But now, her heart ached to see it placed in a corner, the object of ridicule. "Mom, are you okay?" Thomas asked in a small voice. Eleanor smiled at her son. "Of course, Thomas. Don't worry." The party continued. Dinner ended, dessert was served, and coffee was poured. But for Eleanor, time passed slowly. She didn't participate in the conversations, just listening to the voices around her and occasionally glancing at Thomas. Her son was reading his book but would sometimes look up at his mother with concern. "Eleanor, are you leaving already?" Martha asked, seeing Eleanor pick up her coat. "Yes, Mother. I need to get Thomas to bed early," she answered quietly. "Thank you for the wonderful party." Martha shrugged. "I see. You'll take the chair, won't you? It is your inheritance, after all." Eleanor nodded. "Of course. Let me help you," Brad offered. "I'll carry it to your car." "No thank you," Eleanor picked up the chair. "It's not that heavy." Vanessa looked at her sister and smiled with a sense of superiority. "Drive home safely, sis. We're all going to see the new condominium now. Want to come?" Eleanor smiled. "Thanks, but I'll pass today. Some other time." She carried the chair and took Thomas's hand, heading for the entrance. Behind them, the relatives were excitedly discussing the condominium tour with Vanessa. "Oh, Eleanor," Martha called out one last time. "The chair leg is broken, so be careful. It'll cost quite a bit to repair, you know." Eleanor nodded without turning around. "I understand." When they stepped outside, the cold wind struck her cheeks. Snow had begun to fall quietly. Eleanor took a deep breath and loaded the chair into the trunk of her car. "Let's go home," she smiled at Thomas. But the smile didn't reach her eyes. As she drove, Eleanor quietly shed tears. She cried silently, occasionally wiping her tears with her sleeve. In the back seat, Thomas silently watched the scenery outside. "You know, Mom," Thomas eventually said quietly. "I think." "What is it?" Eleanor asked without turning around. Thomas thought for a moment, then said softly but clearly. "Mom, it's good we didn't get that condominium." Thomas's words surprised Eleanor so much that she took her eyes off the road and looked at her son. His small face was serious, with an adult-like expression. Eleanor hurriedly returned her gaze to the road and pulled the car over to the shoulder. She turned off the engine and rotated her seat to face her son. "What do you mean?" she asked quietly. Snow gently tapped on the car windows, the contrast with the warmth inside striking. The streetlights illuminated the snowflakes, creating a magical scene. Thomas unbuckled his seatbelt and leaned forward to speak. "Last month, we went on a social studies field trip to City Hall, remember?" Eleanor nodded. Thomas's school emphasized civic education. The children regularly visited city facilities and learned about local politics and development plans. "There was an exhibition of the city's development plans," Thomas continued. "A redevelopment plan for the Back Bay area. That's where the condominium Grandma gave to Aunt Vanessa is located." Eleanor gasped. "Redevelopment?" "Yes," Thomas nodded. "That area will begin major construction next year. Road expansion and a new sewage system installation. Because of that construction, the condominium will be temporarily uninhabitable. And that's not all." He hesitated a bit before continuing. I had to research city public documents for a school assignment. The teacher said, research the future of the area where you live. So I was looking at resources in the library and found information about that condominium. What kind of information? Eleanor asked with a tense expression. That condominium has a huge mortgage left on it, Thomas said in a small voice. The construction company went bankrupt, and the bank is trying to foreclose on the property. That's why it was being sold cheaply. But when the redevelopment starts, the value of the whole area will drop. So even if someone tried to sell it right now, nobody would buy it. Eleanor was stunned. Her mother had given Vanessa a gift that was actually a property full of problems. But why? The condominium is more trouble to sell than to live in. Grandma knew that and gave it to Aunt Vanessa, Thomas added. In the car stopped at the roadside, Eleanor and her son gazed at each other, enveloped in the dark night. Eleanor's mind was in confusion. Thomas, when did you research this? Thomas shrugged slightly. When I study at the library. I want to be an urban planner someday. So I'm interested in Boston's development plans. And after a moment of silence, he added, but there's one thing I don't understand. Why did Grandma give you that old chair? Eleanor took a deep breath. I don't know either. She started the car's engine again. The snow was falling more heavily now. They had about 10 more minutes to drive to their small house. Are you sad, Mom? Thomas asked quietly. Eleanor pondered. Her heart was filled with complex emotions. The obvious contempt from her mother, her sister's proud attitude, the sympathetic glances from relatives. But at the same time, she felt deep love for her son's intelligence and kindness. A little sad, but I'll be fine, she answered honestly. We have each other. When they arrived home, they hurried out of the car. Eleanor opened the trunk and took out the old chair. Thomas tried to help, but she shook her head. It's all right. It's not heavy. When they entered the house, warm air enveloped them. Eleanor placed the chair in the center of the living room and silently contemplated it. The old wooden chair seemed oddly out of place in her small, modest home. I'll make some tea, Eleanor headed to the kitchen. Let's relax a bit. While the water was boiling, she gazed out the window. Snow covered the entire garden, wrapping the world in silence. Her mind was confused, trying to understand the reason behind her mother's actions. Martha had always been a strict, sometimes cold mother. When Eleanor decided to major in literature in college, Martha was furious. She condemned her for not choosing a practical path like business or law. And when Eleanor decided to take over her father's old bookstore, Martha called her a dreamer and scorned her. Vanessa was different. She walked the path Martha wanted. She studied business at a prestigious university and became successful in the real estate industry. Martha always called Vanessa her smart daughter and praised her choices. And now, Martha had given Vanessa a problematic condominium as a gift and given Eleanor a broken chair. What did it mean? Mom, look. Thomas's voice interrupted Eleanor's thoughts. She returned from the kitchen to find her son sitting on the floor, examining the chair. What is it? This chair is very old, Thomas said excitedly. But it's made of really good material. Look at this grain. And the detail in these carvings. Eleanor knelt beside her son. Indeed, despite its age, the chair was a beautiful piece of craftsmanship. The central backrest had delicate leaf patterns carved into it, and the legs formed elegant curves. The seat cushion was worn but had clearly once been covered with high-quality leather. This might be a genuine antique, Eleanor said quietly. If properly restored, it could be quite valuable. So Grandma gave you something good after all. Thomas tilted his head. Eleanor smiled. I don't know. Maybe Mother didn't know the chair's value. Or perhaps. She cut herself off. Perhaps what? Nothing. Eleanor stood up. The tea is ready. Let's have some. They sipped their tea, quietly contemplating the chair. Thomas occasionally stood up, walked around the chair, and observed it from various angles. Mom, we can fix this chair, right? Thomas asked. Of course, Eleanor nodded. We'll repair it together on the weekend. It'll be a good experience. That night, after putting Thomas to bed, Eleanor returned to the living room alone. She sat before the old chair and traced its outline with her fingers. Why? She whispered. Why did you give me this, Mother? The chair maintained its silence, reflecting the moonlight as it stood quietly. Eleanor sighed and stood up. Tomorrow was a business day at the bookstore. She needed to get to bed early. But before going to bed, she approached the chair again and examined the unstable leg. The repair seemed simple. It appeared that the wooden joint had just loosened. As she tilted the chair, the seat cushion lifted slightly. Oh! Eleanor grabbed a flashlight and illuminated beneath the seat. The cushion wasn't completely fixed to the chair, the edge was loose. Driven by curiosity, she lifted the cushion. Beneath the seat was a small space, and hidden inside was an old envelope. Eleanor gasped. She removed the envelope and felt her hands trembling. The envelope had her name written on it. It was her grandfather's handwriting. This chair is. Eleanor murmured. Her grandfather Joseph had died when she was a child. He was a gentle, quiet man who often read books to young Eleanor. He was the one who nurtured her love for literature. Eleanor was about to open the envelope and take out its contents when she heard Thomas's small voice. Mom, is there something inside? Eleanor turned around, startled. Thomas stood halfway up the stairs in his pajamas, rubbing his sleepy eyes. Thomas, why are you up? Eleanor asked gently. I heard a noise, he answered softly, coming down the stairs. Did you find something in the chair? Eleanor looked at her son and felt she couldn't lie to his intelligent eyes. Yes, I found an envelope. It was hidden under the seat. Thomas's eyes widened. A treasure map. Eleanor laughed. I don't know. I haven't opened it yet. They sat side by side on the sofa, and Eleanor opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were documents with the texture of old parchment and a newer envelope. The first document appeared to be the will of Eleanor's grandfather, Joseph Griffin. It was dated about a year before he died. Eleanor unfolded it, and together with Thomas, began to read. I, Joseph Griffin, being of sound mind, declare the following as my final will. The document contained legal terminology, but the central content was clear. Joseph wished to leave Eleanor the rights to land he owned. The land was in the center of the city and was described as likely to become the center of future development. As they read further into the document, they encountered a surprising passage. To one who can discern what is truly valuable, I entrust this property. I instruct my daughter Martha to give this antique chair to Eleanor. This chair was inherited from my father and has our family's wisdom and history carved into it. I am confident that Eleanor will discover the true value of this chair. Eleanor gasped. She proceeded to open the second envelope. It contained the deed to the land and a letter from her grandfather. Dear Eleanor, the letter began. If you're reading this, it means you found the hidden value of the chair. I always told you not to judge by appearances. This chair may look old and worthless, but if you look with true eyes, you'll see how special it is. You always had such eyes. The letter continued. Eleanor's grandfather wrote that he was proud of her love for literature and her ability to understand the value of old things, and that he wanted to leave her the rights to this land. The land was in the center of the city's redevelopment plan and was of enormous value. Martha had been instructed in the will to give the chair to Eleanor. Martha knows I've specified this in my will. How she chooses to give you this chair is her decision. I love my daughter, but I worry that she sometimes loses sight of what truly matters. You're different, Eleanor. That's why I entrust this inheritance to you." Eleanor finished reading the letter and was stunned. Her grandfather had trusted her and entrusted her with an important inheritance. Martha had known this and had given her the chair as an object of ridicule. "Mom, what does this mean?" Thomas asked in a small voice. Eleanor took a deep breath. "It means that Grandpa left something important to me. And Grandma knew about it." "But why did Grandma?" "Well, it's late now. Let's talk more tomorrow." Eleanor gently took Thomas back to bed. When morning came, Eleanor made a decision. She decided to visit her mother to confront her with the truth. She left Thomas at a friend's house and headed alone to Martha's mansion. The door was opened, surprisingly, by Martha herself. Usually, the housekeeper would answer. "Eleanor?" Martha said with a surprised face. "Did you forget something?" "I need to talk to you, Mother," Eleanor said quietly but firmly. "About the chair." The color drained from Martha's face. She hesitated for a moment, then opened the door wide. "Come in." In the living room, Vanessa and Brad were seated. Both looked more tired than yesterday. "Well, Eleanor," Vanessa said coldly. "What brings you here today?" Eleanor took out the envelope and placed it on the table. "I found Grandfather's will and the land deed. They were hidden in the chair." For a moment, the room was completely silent. Martha slowly sat down and covered her face with her hands. Vanessa looked at Eleanor with a confused expression. "What do you mean?" Vanessa asked. "The rights to land that Grandfather owned were left to me," Eleanor explained quietly. "That land is in the center of the city's redevelopment plan and is enormously valuable." Brad leaned forward. "Which land?" Eleanor pointed to a map. "Here, near City Hall." Brad's face changed. As a real estate investor, he seemed to immediately understand the value of that land. Did Martha know about this? Brad turned his gaze to Martha. Martha let out a long sigh. Giving that chair to Eleanor was Father's will, she admitted with a bitter expression. "That land is Eleanor's. It was Father's will." But if Vanessa knew that... Her words were interrupted. Vanessa had stood up with an expression full of anger. "So the condominium you gave me is worthless, while you left Eleanor an enormous fortune." Her voice was trembling. "Vanessa, calm down," Martha said. "I gave you what you deserved. A luxury condominium, a wonderful home." "Liar!" Brad suddenly shouted. "That condominium is full of problems. You must have known about the eviction due to redevelopment and the huge remaining mortgage." Eleanor was surprised. Thomas's research had been accurate. Martha raised her face. "That's an investment. There may be temporary inconveniences, but in the long term." "There is nothing in the long term." Brad was trembling with anger. "You deceived us. That condominium is nothing but a liability. But you gave Eleanor a gold mine." Vanessa turned to Eleanor. "It's all your fault. You're always so quiet, but behind the scenes, you manipulated Grandfather too." "Enough, Vanessa," surprisingly, Martha interrupted. "Eleanor didn't manipulate anyone. Father simply valued her sincerity." Brad stood up and grabbed his coat. "I'm out. Martha, I won't be part of your game." "Vanessa, I'm sorry, but our engagement is over." "Brad!" Vanessa cried out. "What do you mean? You're leaving me?" "You don't truly love me," Brad said coldly. "All you want is wealth and status. You might as well beg your sister for a share. Goodbye." Brad left the room. The three women were left in silence. Vanessa stared at Eleanor with hatred. "It's all your fault," she said in a trembling voice. "Give me that deed. It should have been mine." She lunged at Eleanor, trying to grab the documents. But Martha stood between them. "Stop it, Vanessa." Martha's voice was harsh. "It's Eleanor's right. It was Father's will." Eleanor was shocked. She couldn't remember her mother ever defending her. She looked at Martha and saw tears glistening in her mother's eyes. "Mother. I was wrong," Martha said quietly. "All this time." For several weeks after that, Eleanor held her grandfather's land deed and pondered her options. According to experts, the land was incredibly valuable and, if properly developed, could transform her and Thomas's lives completely. But Eleanor's heart was conflicted. "I understand the value of this land, but is this what I need?" she asked herself. At night, while doing the bookstore's accounting, she remembered her grandfather's words, "To one who can discern what is truly valuable, I entrust this property." One afternoon, when Thomas returned from school, he stopped in front of the chair that was being repaired. "Mom, why don't we finish fixing this chair properly?" he suggested. "It's a gift from Grandpa, after all." Eleanor looked at her son and smiled. "Yes, let's do it together." They began repairing the chair over the weekend. They polished the old wood, secured the loose joints, and covered the worn seat with new leather. While working, Eleanor felt her heart becoming strangely peaceful. Her hands were touching the same wood that her grandfather's hands had touched. "I wonder if Grandpa fixed the chair like this too," Thomas asked. "I'm sure he did," Eleanor answered. Grandpa was someone who treasured things. He had an eye for true value, not just surface value. As the chair repair progressed, a change also occurred in Eleanor's heart. She made a decision about what to do with the land rights. But before she could implement her decision, news came that Martha had fallen ill. Eleanor rushed to her mother's side without hesitation. In the master bedroom of Martha's mansion, she found her mother lying in bed. Martha looked weak, unlike her formerly dignified self. "You came," Martha said in a small voice. "Of course, Mother." Eleanor pulled up a chair and sat by her mother's bedside. For several days, Eleanor nursed Martha. During this time, the wall between them gradually crumbled. One night, Martha suddenly began to speak. "I never evaluated you correctly," she confessed. "I always thought success meant money and status. When you chose a different path, I couldn't understand it." Eleanor listened silently. "I've been lonely for many years," Martha continued. "After your father died, I protected myself by pretending to be strong. You were strong. But Vanessa, she's like me, weak at heart." For the first time, Eleanor felt she understood her mother's complex feelings. She took her mother's hand and said, "Everything's all right now." Several months later, Martha's health recovered. By that time, Vanessa's situation had also changed dramatically. After her breakup with Brad, she faced the difficulty of living alone with a condominium full of loans. One day, Vanessa came to Eleanor's bookstore looking weak. Her former haughty attitude was gone, and her eyes held the color of remorse. "I need help. I have nothing left," she confessed tearfully. Eleanor said nothing and embraced her sister. That autumn, Eleanor decided to use her grandfather's land to build a community library and bookstore complex. Named Morrison Community Book Center, the facility became a place where people of all ages, from children to the elderly, could encounter books. Vanessa ended up working there, and her organizational skills and business sense were very helpful in managing the facility. Martha also gradually became involved and took charge of reading sessions for the elderly. The repaired chair was placed in the center of the facility, watching over children reading their favorite books. "There may be no such thing as a perfect family, but we can support each other," Eleanor once told Thomas. "True richness isn't in money or status, but in the people who walk alongside us." Thomas nodded and took his mother's hand. Outside the window, snow had begun to quietly fall on the streets of Boston.